Okay, next up on Big Talk from Small Libraries 2026, we are going to talk about providing library services centered on disability. Stephanie Smith is with us from the University of New Mexico, Center for Development and Disability Library. So I am going to hand it over to you, Stephanie. I can't talk. And tell us about what you've been doing at your library.
So I was just saying that I really feel like I sort of found my people. Clearly, this is because the programming has been so awesome, but I too am an accidental librarian. I started out in libraries. My first job was University Library Tech Services. I worked in a medical library as my first full-time job. And then I went and got a master's and a PhD in history, and I worked for the Air Force for 22 years. I'm a recent retiree, and I sort of fell into this job at the UNM Center for Development and Disability, where I'm the library operations manager. So my boss told me that she hired me because I have a very weird resume, right? So you've heard about, obviously, the career shift there, but I also spent several years as a community organizer working in the Central Valley of California, which is one of the most polluted, most illiterate, poorest areas of the country, with one of the highest rates of disability, particularly among farm workers, and one of the greatest per capita incidences of police violence, particularly around disability. And so what that says is that for me, bringing that advocacy piece has been really important, and it's part of what's informing what I'm going to talk about today. Excuse me. So, clearly you can't see that I have an invisible disability. That really informed how I have approached this, and I think also how I want to talk about library services, because we really approach disability so oddly in this country. And one of the things that is important to me as part of a Center for Disability is to really make sure that we center the way that we talk to people, the way that we interact with our patrons, the way that we provide library services in a way that isn't just about accessibility. It is, the library world is all over that and has been. And right, so Library of Congress opens a reading room for the disabled in the 1890s, right? American Library Association has been all over the issues of dealing with disability. But at the same time, I feel like we have, as a Center for Disability, a place to really talk about disability and what that means for our library service, even as we are always learning about it. So I certainly don't want to say that I am an expert of any kind. And we all have probably way more library experience than I do. Also, we don't know just by looking who has a disability, so I may also be preaching to the choir. But this is something that's really important to me and an important part of what I do here. And so one of the things when I first realized that I was disabled is really thinking about Susan Sontag's quote from Illness's Metaphor, which she first wrote about when she was diagnosed with cancer. Illness is the night side of life, a more onerous citizenship. But everyone who's born has this dual citizenship, the kingdom of the well and the kingdom of the sick. And although we prefer to only use the good passport, sooner or later, each of us is obliged, at least for a spell, to identify ourselves as citizens of that other place. And we really don't like to, in this culture, in my experience, to really talk about disability, to really think about disability and illness. They're very uncomfortable topics. I come from a German and Norwegian background where we just really are stiff upper lip about everything. But at the same time, this also helps me not just provide accessibility and accommodation, but really try to think through library services through that lens. And always, of course, try to be improving because there's always more to learn. And the reason that I think it matters to anybody in this group or in libraries is that 10 to 20% of the world's population is disabled. And not all of them, of course, are visible disabilities. And the degree to which people accept that term about themselves is variable.
Mm.
But disability is also the only minority or marginalized group that you can join anywhere, anytime. Accident, aging, illness, war. And that means that it's really relevant to everyone. Everyone in our communities, in our families, in our libraries. And I feel really passionately about that and about recognizing how important that is and yet how marginalized it is. So I have some caveats here, right? So first of all, our library is not perfect. It is not a perfect model of accessibility. I'm not the Hunter Park Library in Queens, right? Which is like the infamous, wow, you can't get any accessibility because we didn't build it in. But we have plenty of issues with accessibility, both physically and otherwise. I don't have spaces necessarily that are 36 inches wide, like they're supposed to be for physically disabled patrons. Our library, like many other libraries, groceries, and other places,
Mm.
and y'all having more experience in libraries, certainly there's plenty that I don't need to teach you or tell you. There's plenty that I still also need to learn as well. But it's as someone who has that invisible disability, it's so common for us to assume that we know what disability looks like. Anybody that has a disabled parking pass and isn't in a wheelchair knows this. People get confronted because you don't look disabled, or you're too young to be that disabled, or things like that. So some disabilities are visible, others, like mine, are not. And yet I still require accommodations in some ways. And clearly libraries are all over this, but for us in particular, I really feel like we have to be modeling to the best that we can really how to reach our disabled constituency in our library. One of the things that you've already heard me mention is this idea of what it's like to be disabled in public. Because obviously not all of us who are disabled are, but when COVID came around and I was isolated at home in a new city where I had only lived for 78 days.
Jeez. Okay.
The Department of Defense that I worked for did not allow us to travel on personal time, work in that entire time. Social media was really a great support, as it is for a lot of disabled people. And I learned a lot about what the experience of being visibly disabled is like. And it's not something that I was familiar with. And I've been guilty, even working here, speaking to the caregiver and not to the disabled person. Um, Certainly, we don't ever want to touch people, but we don't think anything about touching people's wheelchairs or moving their mobility devices and things like that. There was a hashtag for a while, ableds are weird, because of these kinds of interactions. People saying, oh, you're so inspiring. Can I give you a hug? Absolutely not. Oh, can I pray over you? An activist called Imani Barbaran, who has cerebral palsy, was the keynote speaker at a conference, and 12 times during that conference, people tried to lay hands on her to pray for her to be healed. And while people are well-meaning, for some of us, disability is not just part of our identity, it's a political identity. And so that means more than just how we look or think about things, it's how we move through the world. And you'll see that in the language that I use. My organization likes to talk about people being people first, a person with a disability. For me and for a lot of folks who are politically active in the disability community, I'm a disabled person. It's incommensurate to remove that from my identity. It's part of how I approach the world. And it's not true for everyone. Obviously, we have such a stigma about disability and illness. I am old enough to remember when people used to say that so-and-so had cancer, right? We didn't say that out loud. But really, I hope that this informs how we approach our patrons, how we approach our services here. It's really part of our job. And so I'm excited to get to talk to folks about this and some of the ideas that I have about what that looks like for folks who have not lived it. And then, of course, always more for me to learn about libraries and about how y'all approach things. So we are part of one of 68 University Centers for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, Education, Research, and Service. We call them USEDS. Ours was founded under the University of New Mexico in 1990. Our mission is to support the well-being of all New Mexicans with assessment, evaluation, services, and so on. And our library is part of that under the center. We serve our center with our professionals who work here, but also our families and individuals with disabilities. USEDs have been around since 1963, when President Kennedy signed the first act in creating the first 19. We now are all funded under, partially at least, the Developmental Disabilities Act, and our mission is also described there as well. So a USED core function is to focus on interdisciplinary preparation, continuing education for professionals. So I routinely do trainings about our services and our community with people with developmental and other disabilities and their families, conduct research, and provide community services, including direct services. We're the only ones that don't provide direct services, but we do, of course, deal with patrons. Part of our job is also outreach. And so that's one of the things that I really like, and that weird resume of mine really helps with, is that we go out into the community to talk about what we do, what the center does. We have an information resource line so people can call us with any disability related question, and we connect them to resources statewide. Although we aim to serve the entire state, we really are very small, and we don't actually have a budget of our own. So I'm always dealing with, we are grant funded. And so whatever other people's grant money like falls off or that they have saved for us is what I have to spend. I currently have a budget for books of $500 for the fiscal year. I have my autism team giving us $3,400 for autism related books. And we do have a focus on developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, but our collection also includes general health information, other disability information. We are completely separate from the University of New Mexico library system and from the Health Sciences Library, which means I don't. We only have about 3,324 patrons, not all of them active, and a collection of about 11,000 items. One of the things that I really love about our library is that we have a specifically tailored classification scheme. It arose because our collection was originally someone's personal collection. And so they just started labeling books by disability. Anything that is about a disability in our collection is labeled first with a D and then with the first 3 letters of the disability. That's an issue when we see changes in how disabilities are classified or discussed. For example, the difference between like Asperger's and then ADHD and autism spectrum disorders. But of course, one of our largest is this autism section, and anybody can find it by looking under D-AUT for autism or D-VIS for visibility and blindness issues, like things like that. So what I like about it is it's easy to explain, and even my very first day, I was able to walk in and find stuff, and patrons find that as well. We do have a collection of assistive technologies for our patrons. So that includes things like a modern, what they used to be called Optilex. It basically is magnifiers that can not only serve for people with low vision and legal blindness, but also help people with dyslexia, because you can change the font, you can change the background. We have computers with large print keyboards that you can throw up onto a TV screen to get visibility. We of course always have things like fidgets and noise muffling headphones available. I'm really proud of this computer that has PC with eye-enabled software so that you don't have to be able to move the mouse, and also has a screen reader. And we even have a little scanner pen that upload. All of those are to help folks with different issues. Yeah, my connection is unstable, and I'm sorry I haven't been able to do anything about that. I apologize.
Yeah, that's okay. Actually, I was gonna suggest actually, if you want to, you can turn off the camera. Like, don't have the webcam. That might save some of your bandwidth to make it not so choppy.
Okay.
And that's
yeah.
fine. So if you had the camera for most of it, and that's okay. So just go ahead and yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let's try that. Okay.
Yeah. There we go. Great. I did that for my side too. So hopefully this will help with the connection. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So a lot of the influences that we have in this country, we're really weird about disability and illness, particularly in the US. And I've already talked about what it's like to be disabled in public, but it actually used to be illegal in a number of states and cities to be disabled in public. They're called the ugly laws. The first one was in San Francisco in 1867. They're very closely tied to poverty, but anyone who looked like they were disabled, diseased, mutilated, deformed, so as to be an unsightly or disgusting object, was not allowed to be in public. People were arrested, jailed, fined, sometimes even institutionalized. And of course, we also have, if anybody is familiar even with the story of, say, Rose Kennedy, of institutionalizing disabled people. People will be told their sibling was dead and never see them again because they were hidden away in these institutions that were meant to be providing specialized services, and at the same time were very unsafe places to be. And it's, as I mentioned, part of where I come from is this disability rights background. And disability has been part of civil rights from the very beginning, and disabled people are the reason that we have an end to those kinds of laws, an end to institutionalization, educational supports for disability starting under Section 504. And it really has taken literal disabled people putting their bodies on the line to gain those rights. In 1977, there was this accessibility law on the books in the United States that just was not going to be enforced until there were sit-ins around the country in government and public buildings. The Americans with Disabilities Act would not have been passed without the efforts of disabled people, including what's called the Capitol Crawl. And disabled people literally crawled up the state Capitol steps, or the federal Capitol steps in DC, to show how important it was to have the Americans with Disabilities Act. We even have a book for kids about this little girl, Jennifer, who was 8 years old and who wanted to crawl up the steps for every one of her friends who was disabled. But one of the things that is really important about even the way that our center talks about disability is that it's all about productivity. We really think that you have to be productive, you have to be useful, and it's this what Brooke Ellison calls this mercantilistic utilitarian view of disability and how we fail to value disabled people's lives. I like the WHO definition of disability that includes not just a physical condition, but also the other environmental factors, including attitudes, accessibility, and limited social supports. I won't get into this models of disability, but one of the biggest one that influences how disabled people are treated in public is this moral model that disability is a mark of shame, of sin. You don't deserve to be, fully participating in society, and you really need people to pray over you to heal you. The medical model also just basically says you're broken and you need to be fixed. And it's really disabled people that have moved towards a more social cultural model. It's not a special need, it's just a human need. And really trying to focus more on how one of the concepts that originated in the disability rights movement is also this issue of ableism. And you heard me mention that in that ableds are weird hashtag. But ableism is really assigning value to bodies based on ideas about normality, productivity, desirability. One of the things that this author Talila and advocate Talila Lewis talks about is like a social value of even the way people move. Like we value walking, and that's the default versus using a wheelchair. And we, talk about with ableism, this systemic oppression of determining people's value on being physically healthy, but then also being complicated by all the rest of the isms, sexism, and so on. But disability is really not a bad word. We want to talk about being disabled because it's such a common human condition. Clearly, like I said, it's part of my identity. It's often a part, especially for politically active people, a part of their identity. And so it's important to me to recognize that. And like I said, libraries have been doing great with this for a very long time. And for me, it's not that we're not trying to be accessible. It's not that we're not trying to be accommodating, either because of the ADA or other reasons. But from a disabled perspective, from that lens, to talk about what is it like to be inclusive of disability and welcoming. We are certainly not the only place, for example, that does story time for sensory friendly and neurodiverse kids, right? We offer fidgets, we offer muffled headphones that muffle noise. We have a dedicated chill out space. We're super, super accepting of any kind of behavior, particularly because the focus of the center is those developmental disabilities. But one of our patrons, this is only part of what she wrote in our recent survey, that this accepting and welcoming place really allowed her son to not even from starting a year ago, not even be able to stay for a whole book, to engage, to listen, to engage with his peers, to play. And we're really lucky to have my other full-time person is a former special education teacher and music therapist. And that makes a huge difference in how she approaches this. And she has really made this a very welcoming space, right? There's no pressure on how you behave. My favorite example is a family that was new to us. We'll call the little boy Domenico. He was about 5. He was a neurotypical child, apparently, with a sister that we'll call Risa, who was clearly neurodiverse in some way. And at the beginning of story time, Domenico talked for and basically explained Risa to us like it was his job. And it was so lovely to see my education specialist just really, really calmly say, it's okay, we understand. Risa can do whatever she wants. She doesn't have to sit down. It's okay. You don't have to explain. It's okay. You can just listen to the story. And to see him really be able to take a break from explaining and smoothing his sister's way in a very loving way, but in a way that's, for what, maybe a 5-year-old, that's a lot. Both of them were able to relax into this, to participate. And by the end of it, Risa not only had been engaging, moved out of our chill out space, moved away from the fidgets, came into the circle. By the end, she was sitting in the education specialist's lap and learning how to play the guitar. And her mom cried at how important a step that was. And so when we think about inclusion, one of the things that I wanted to talk about specifically related to disability is generally recognizing the capability of all disabled people, right? We don't always know what folks are dealing with, but we always we try anyways to really err on the side of assuming capability. Understanding that disability can be variable, right? Not all disabilities are static. Not everybody who has the same disability has the same needs, the same issues, the same preferences. And of course, you've already heard me talk about the ways in which so many disabilities are invisible. And not only is it hard to get accommodations for an invisible disability, but then being, as you've heard me say, disabled in public is hard too. So there's a way that sometimes you can be too visible. And then my disability, like many others, is not static. It's not predictable. Sometimes are better than others. And so we see a lot in the disability community, people talking about people who are faking disability, right? I mentioned being accosted because you have a disabled parking pass but no visible disability, or folks being told, well, you're too young to use that cane, or you don't look sick, and things like that. And it has really sensitized me to the ways that we just never really know, and we can't assume. I feel like I do notice more because it's part of my daily life. But of course, then we also really never know what anybody's dealing with. And again, not trying to preach to a community that's already doing and leading the way in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously, we've got neurodiversity coming up on, the schedule, but at the same time, just trying to broaden the way that folks think about and approach this. I also notice that not all libraries have very disability-friendly policies. So one of the things that I have seen folks run into in other library systems is, like our system here in Albuquerque, I have to show up in person with my ID to get a physical library card. Our library doesn't do that because we don't take ID, we serve the whole state, we don't care where you live in the state. We don't charge fines, we don't charge fees. If you lose a book, I ask you to replace it, that's it. But of course, not every library has that, those kinds of policies and that latitude. But, are there ways that we can allow folks who can't physically come to the library to prove their identity? Not every library has that exception available, or folks haven't been able to find who to talk to, how to find out who to do that, who's allowed to, let them say, zoom in and say, here's my ID and here's my face, or can I send you my documents, right? So that's just something to think about. Again, do we waive fees and fines for folks who are, say, impoverished or who are disabled? I mean, disability is the greatest predictor in this country of poverty. Our library, because we serve the whole state, and our grant funds free mail order for books so people can check out a book and mail it back to us for free. We will also mail most of our materials anywhere in the state. Not every library has that latitude either, but are there places that we can refer some of our disabled patrons to if there are materials that they want that we don't have in electronic or e-audio format? Are we running mask-friendly events? I lost jobs when I started applying because I mask. A place might say, when I ask, is this out of step with your culture? That was a defense contractor founded by Marines. And while they said, no, that's not a problem, I got a rejection the next day. And it's easy for me to wear a mask here. Nobody has a problem with it. But that's not necessarily always the case. And I've only been to one other place in Albuquerque that says it's mask friendly. And that's not always an easy thing to say, depending on where we live and what our local politics are like, but it's something to consider. I might need breaks with particularly long events. And then sometimes the timing doesn't work for folks. A lot of medical appointments, for example, are during the day. Good luck trying to get something else. And our library certainly isn't a model for that. I'm open Monday through Friday, 9 to 4, because that's what my grant says. That's not super accessible for folks who want outside programming or who can't get here and so on. Public libraries have more latitude with that. But then also, are we thinking about maybe, one of the questions we got on our recent survey was, can we do online virtual events alongside our regular events, alongside of our in-person events? And obviously bigger libraries are going to have probably more policies, more equipment, and more latitude for that, but it's something for the rest of us to think about too. Do our policies about inclusion and rights and so on include disability, right? Are we talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and not including disability? It's very common for disaster planning, for example, for schools to not include disability and to not have good solutions. Hotels are the same way. Generally, if you are in a wheelchair, the disaster plan, whether it's a school shooter or a fire, is to gather in a central place, call for help, and wait. We're lucky that we're a very small center, we're a very small library. We wouldn't have most likely much of an issue, but it's something to really to think about. How does that look in our library, and what can we do to make sure that we try to think those things through? It's also really important to me to not ever assume that I know everything about disability, even as I'm standing here preaching to you. My apologies. But the motto of the disability rights movement is nothing about us without us. And so for us, it's important to talk to, and it's part of our jobs, to talk to the disability community, to really see what their needs are, right? How we can help them, and also get feedback on what works for people here and what doesn't. We are, partly because my other two staff not only have disabilities, but they have children with disabilities, have really strong ties to disability organizations in the community that we already work with. And like I said, that's part of our job, is to outreach to various disability organizations, groups, interest groups, and so on, when we conferences related to disabilities of all kinds. But having those trusted contacts in your community that can help tell you what folks might need might also be really important. Again, there's always more for me to learn. There's always more for us to learn. We certainly don't know everything, and we aren't a perfect library by any means when it comes to that. But focused library, serving the whole state, that's really important, because this is a very mostly rural state. We are 17%, so greater than the national average rate of disability compared to the rest of the U.S. We're on a par disability rates in Appalachia, for example. And while we try to serve the whole state with our mail order and so on, there's plenty of people that don't know about us, and COVID really didn't help. It really sort of broke some of the connections that folks had with us and with our services. And it's very clear that we stayed closed and open by appointment only for a very long time, because we're a center for disability, in order to keep folks safe and getting the word out that we are in the library, that you can come by, that you don't need an appointment, has been really difficult. Even people who responded to our survey because they had gotten an email from us, from our library system patron emails, or from our Facebook page, or from our newsletter, or just emails to the center, it was clear that people didn't realize that, oh, you're still here, and oh, you're still available, and oh, we can walk in now. there's always more to do when it comes to that, and always more to learn. But what we hope is that more of our outreach can just really broaden our base and our ability to serve folks. There are also 22 sovereign nations within the confines of the state of New Mexico, and many of them have libraries. Indigenous populations are also far more likely to be disabled than the average American, particularly in New Mexico, because of our history of nuclear testing and so on, particularly around indigenous areas, as well as pollution and so on. But we also have to be culturally sensitive about how we reach out, because they are sovereign. Even places that have said, hey, we want X help from our center, really have only responded sometimes to an official letter of introduction from our director, because that means that we're treating them like the sovereign nation that they are. And it doesn't help that I'm not from here. And so there are a lot of those sensitivities that I don't understand as well. Those also, of course, are not common to every state, certainly not where I grew up. But it's something that we have to try to overcome as a barrier with our local population, because there's so little connection and so little knowledge of what we do and what we can offer. So one of our divisions that we work with closely, our autism division, that provides direct services for folks who have autism, that provide assessment, evaluation, and referral for waivers for getting state care subsidized for disabled children and adults, has started a page on our webpage of resources for libraries. And some of them are going to be familiar because they're American Library Association resources, but we do have someone from that division that's also working on doing some tips for neurodiversity in libraries and tips for accommodating other disabilities. So you can reach us there, and you can also call me or email me with any questions or information that you'd like, or visit our library catalog. And I really want to thank y'all for listening, and hope that you've been able to learn from our experience, and I'm excited to learn from what y'all have to share.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yes. Everybody, we'll leave these slides up here so you can grab the QR codes. We don't want to have anyone miss out on that, of course. If anybody does have any questions, type them into your question section. I want to make sure we answer some questions you might have of Stephanie about what they're doing at her library there, or about how you can do improve how you are dealing with disability issues at your library. Or if there's anything you've done that has been successful that could be helpful to other libraries, please do type into the question section. As I said, this is another very, of course, important topic and I always find it, I'm stunned that some places are still not realizing that this is something that needs to be done, that it's not just commonplace anymore. And so I'm glad that you were able to come here and come today and join us and tell us about how this is still an issue that people are struggling with. Yeah. Someone did say, thank you for your service. I worked in an Air Force library. Someone else worked in the Air Force library. Nice.
Nice. Yeah, it has been a big adjustment. No one knows what time I'm saying it is. No one understands my slang, but I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Someone wants to know, can you go back one slide to that other QR code too? They're
Yes.
two different ones, correct?
Yes.
They're two different things. Okay.
Yeah, so this is our autism team's beginnings of resources for libraries. They're also working on what we call a tip sheet, which is basically like a live linked or printable handout that gives specific resources and information. But this person is brand new and is just starting out, so expect to see more there as well. And of course, like I mentioned, American Library Association, as always, is already on it, and some of those will be familiar to you.
Yeah, so anybody who's looking for where to type in your questions or comments or chat, there's the questions section in your GoToWebinar interface is what to use. And that's what I'm monitoring here. And I can see anything that you type that you want to comment or share or ask questions. Yeah, all right. Yes, and this is only, yeah, there isn't, someone's asking about participants chatting amongst each other. Sorry, this is about the session today. No, there's not a chat where you comment back and forth to each other. No, it's just
Okay,
just to submit questions to me to share with our presenters today. Yeah, we don't have any of that kind of background chat. All right, I think that was it for the questions and comments. Looks like I don't see anything else.
Great.
Desperate questions coming in. That is fine. I think we will wrap it up today. So thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you.
I hope a lot of people do use the resources you have there. And as we did, there's a lot of good tips and everything in the slides. And as I said at the beginning, I know a lot of people have joined since we started. All of the entire day is being recorded, so everything will be available for you later in an archive recording, and all the presentation slides that everyone is using will be included as well. So all the links that are on here, these QR codes, you'll have them again in the recording and in the when the slides are available on our website.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie.